Imagine standing in a land rich with culture, beauty, and tradition. Yet every law, every order, every decision about your future is made by a foreign power thousands of miles away. Now imagine the moment your people decide they will no longer bow their heads, but instead rise together to reclaim the destiny that is rightfully theirs. When we think about the beginnings of the relationship between the Philippines and Spain, it's important to picture a time long before bustling cities and busy streets. In 1565, the arrival of Spanish forces led by Miguel López de Legazpi marked the beginning of more than 3 centuries of colonial rule. The Spanish crown saw the islands not only as a strategic location for trade between Asia and the Americas, but also as fertile ground for spreading Christianity. They brought with them priests, soldiers, and merchants, all with different purposes yet united under the Spanish flag. The establishment of settlements, forts, and missions changed the way communities were organized. Local barangays, once led by datos and bound by their own customs, were gradually woven into a system of centralized governance under Spanish authority. Alongside these political changes came the introduction of Catholicism, which would deeply shape the culture, traditions, and festivals of the islands. The Manila, Acapulco galleon trade connected the Philippines to the global economy, bringing goods, ideas, and influences from faraway lands, though the benefits were often enjoyed more by the colonizers than the locals. Spanish rule also meant new systems of land ownership, taxation, and labor, which disrupted traditional ways of life and sometimes brought hardship to the native population. Over time, these transformations created a society that was a blend of indigenous heritage and Spanish influence, yet also laid the groundwork for growing discontent. The rich natural resources of the islands were harnessed to serve the interests of the Spanish Empire, and while some Filipinos adapted and even thrived under the new order, others began to quietly imagine a life where they could determine their own destiny, free from foreign control. The seeds of change were planted in those early days, even as Spain tightened its hold on the archipelago. The seeds of resistance in the Philippines began to take root as the effects of centuries of Spanish colonial rule became more deeply felt by the people. While some Filipinos accepted the new social and religious order, others saw the heavy taxes, forced labor, and unequal treatment as a burden that stripped them of dignity and freedom. Over time, the growing gap between the privileged class, often tied to the colonial administration, and the ordinary Filipino fueled quiet frustration. In the 19th century, the rise of an educated middle class, known as the Ilustrados, opened new channels for resistance. Many of them studied in Europe, where they encountered liberal ideas about equality, justice, and national self-determination. Figures like José Rizal, Marcelo H. del Pilar, and Graciano López Gina used their writings to expose the injustices of colonial rule and inspire a vision of reform. Rizal's novels in particular touched the hearts of many, showing the cruelty of corrupt officials and the pain of a nation under foreign domination. Beyond the pen, secret societies like the Katipunan, founded by Andrés Bonifacio, took a more direct approach, preparing for armed struggle to achieve independence. These movements were strengthened by local uprisings across the islands, often sparked by abuses of power, land disputes, or religious grievances. Though these revolts were sometimes small and quickly suppressed, each one added to the growing awareness that change was possible if people united. By the late 1800s, the idea of a free Philippines was no longer just a dream held by a few. It had become a shared hope. The deepening national consciousness was like a fire slowly spreading, impossible to extinguish completely, and ready to burst into open rebellion when the right moment arrived. The outbreak of the Philippine Revolution in 1896 was the turning point when quiet dreams of freedom transformed into the sound of marching feet and the clash of bolos against rifles. 4 years, the Katipunan, led by Andrés Bonifacio, had been working in secret, recruiting members from all walks of life. Farmers, laborers, clerks, and even some from the educated class, bound together by an oath to fight for independence. They met under the cover of night, passing messages in coded symbols and swearing loyalty to the cause. The plan was to prepare carefully and strike when ready, but fate intervened. In August 1896, the Spanish authorities discovered the existence of the Katipunan after a betrayal. This forced the revolutionaries to act sooner than planned. On August 23, members gathered in Pugat Loin and, in a symbolic gesture, tore up their cédulas, the identification papers imposed by the Spanish, declaring their defiance and willingness to risk their lives. Skirmishes began soon after, first in the outskirts of Manila, then spreading to other provinces like Cavite, Bulacan, and Laguna. Though the revolutionaries often lacked weapons and faced a powerful, well-armed colonial army, their determination was unshakable. Cavite became a stronghold under leaders like Emilio Aguinaldo, who achieved early victories that inspired more Filipinos to join. The Spanish responded with brutal reprisals, arresting and executing suspected rebels, the most famous being José Rizal on December 30, 1896. His death, intended to crush the movement, instead became a rallying cry for freedom. The revolution had begun in urgency and sacrifice, and although the path ahead would be filled with both triumph and tragedy, the spirit that drove it could no longer be silenced. What started as a secret brotherhood had ignited into a full-scale struggle for the nation's future. As the Philippine Revolution gained momentum, it also faced internal challenges that led to significant shifts in leadership. The early stages were marked by the influence of Andrés Bonifacio, the founder of the Katipunan, whose vision and courage had sparked the uprising. However, as the conflict spread, the province of Cavite emerged as a stronghold, achieving notable victories against Spanish forces under the leadership of Emilio Aguinaldo. Cavite's successes contrasted with defeats in other regions, and this disparity began to shift the balance of influence within the revolutionary movement. Differences in strategy, regional loyalties, and political vision soon created tension between Bonifacio's faction and Aguinaldo's supporters. These tensions came to a head at the Tigueros Convention in March 1897, a meeting intended to unify leadership but which instead deepened divisions. Aguinaldo was elected president of the revolutionary government, while Bonifacio was given a lesser position. Accusations of irregularities and disrespect led Bonifacio to attempt to establish his own authority, which Aguinaldo's government saw as a threat to unity. This conflict tragically culminated in Bonifacio's arrest, trial, and eventual execution, a decision that left lasting scars on the revolutionary movement. With Aguinaldo firmly in command, the revolution shifted toward more organized military campaigns and diplomatic maneuvers. He sought both to strengthen the army and to negotiate with the Spanish, resulting in the Pact of Biak-Nobato in late 1897, which temporarily halted fighting in exchange for promises of reform and Aguinaldo's exile to Hong Kong. Though the truce was uneasy and ultimately short-lived, the change in leadership had set the revolution on a new course. The movement had transformed from a loosely connected network of rebels into a more centralized force, yet the cost of that transition was the loss of one of its founding figures and the deepening of internal wounds. The Philippine struggle for independence intersected with global events in 1898, most notably through the outbreak of the Spanish-American War. This conflict, primarily sparked by U.S. intervention in Cuba's fight against Spanish rule, expanded into the Pacific theater due to Spain's colonial holdings in the Philippines. The United States, seeking to weaken Spain's imperial presence, dispatched Commodore George Dewey's Asiatic Squadron to Manila Bay. On May 1, 1898, U.S. naval forces decisively defeated the Spanish fleet in a battle that effectively neutralized Spain's ability to defend its Philippine colony by sea. In the aftermath, the U.S. recognized the strategic advantage of collaborating with Filipino revolutionaries, who had resumed their struggle after the breakdown of the Pact of Biak-Nobato. Emilio Aguinaldo, returning from exile in Hong Kong with American assistance, reorganized revolutionary forces and expanded operations against Spanish garrisons throughout the archipelago. The convergence of American military power and Filipino insurgent activity placed Spanish forces in a deteriorating position, unable to maintain effective control over the islands. However, This alliance was shaped by divergent objectives. While Filipino leaders envisioned full independence, U.S. policymakers increasingly viewed the Philippines as a prospective territory for strategic and economic purposes. The capture of Manila in August 1898, achieved through a prearranged mock battle between Spanish and American forces that excluded Filipino troops, underscored these emerging tensions. The war formally concluded with the Treaty of Paris in December 1898, wherein Spain ceded the Philippines to the United States in exchange for $20 million. This transfer of sovereignty marked the end of over 3 centuries of Spanish rule, yet it did not fulfill Filipino aspirations for self-determination. Instead, it set the stage for a new conflict, as the Philippine-American War would soon erupt over the question of the nation's future under another foreign power. The end of Spanish rule in the Philippines was the result of both internal resistance and the shifting tides of international politics in 1898. For more than 3 centuries, Spain had maintained its hold over the islands through a combination of military force, religious influence, and economic control. Yet by the late 19th century, its colonial power was weakening, strained by uprisings across its territories and the growing cost of maintaining overseas possessions. The Philippine Revolution, which had reignited after the return of Emilio Aguinaldo from exile, had already eroded Spanish authority in many provinces. At the same time, the Spanish-American War brought a powerful new actor into the conflict. The decisive defeat of the Spanish fleet at the Battle of Manila Bay in May 1898 left colonial forces unable to defend the archipelago effectively. Filipino revolutionaries gained control over most of the countryside, while American forces secured Manila through an arrangement with Spain that excluded the participation of Filipino troops. This act deepened distrust, but also signaled the inevitability of Spain's withdrawal. The formal conclusion came with the Treaty of Paris, signed on December 10, 1898, in which Spain ceded the Philippines, along with Guam and Puerto Rico, to the United States for $20 million. The treaty ended Spain's era as a major colonial power and brought an abrupt close to more than 333 years of its rule in the Philippines. For the Filipino people, the departure of Spain was both a victory and a disappointment. While it removed the old colonial master, it did not bring the independence they had fought for so fiercely. Instead, sovereignty passed from one foreign power to another, setting the stage for the Philippine-American War and a new chapter of struggle in the quest for true self-governance. The history of the Philippine struggle against Spanish rule is a story of courage, sacrifice, and an unyielding desire for freedom. From the first days of colonial control in 1565, the seeds of resistance quietly grew in the hearts of the people, nourished by centuries of injustice and the vision of leaders who dared to dream of a nation free from foreign domination. The Revolution of 1896 turned those dreams into action, with men and women risking everything to claim their right to self-determination. Shifts in leadership, the complex alliances formed during the Spanish-American War, and the final collapse of Spanish power in 1898 all marked key moments in this turbulent journey. Yet, while the end of Spanish rule closed one chapter, it did not bring the independence so many had fought and died for. Instead, a new struggle emerged under another foreign power. Still, the legacy of this era lives on in the enduring spirit of the Filipino people, a reminder that the fight for freedom is not defined only by the moment it is won, but by the resilience and unity shown along the way.